In 1979, movie audiences entered the notorious house of 112 Ocean Avenue in the Amityville Horror. Starring James Brolin and Margot Kidder, this haunting tale tells the story of the Lutz family, whom have just moved into their new dream home. However, the blissful dreams of family comfort soon become a chaotic nightmare, as the house was also the location of some grisly murders involving the previous family who lived in the house, where soon the Lutz family start to fall apart more and more, as they bear witness to strange apparitions, spooky sounds, and feelings of dread, where George Lutz, played by Brolin, increasingly starts to lose his sanity, with it being implied that the house was built on the gateway to hell. Coming out at a time when there was quite a few ghost and demon movies like The Exorcist, The Omen, The Shining, and Poltergeist, what is it about the Amityville Horror that stands out from the rest? Well, the fact that it was supposedly based on a true story, which is a claim that has increasingly been disputed over the passing of time. But to me, the Amityville Horror is really about the tragedy of a dysfunctional family. I mean, yeah, underneath the bleeding walls and weird demonic pig creature, to me at the core of the Amityville Horror is a story of the strains and failings of a family. So, in my book, it's more compelling than scary. So with that, 10 things that you didn't know about the Amityville Horror. Let's check it out. Number 10. Fact or fiction? The Amityville Horror is based on a 1977 book of the same name, which is supposedly based on true events. Okay, well if we look at the timeline of events, the Amityville tale starts in 1974, when Ronald DeFeo Jr. killed 6 members of his family at 112 Ocean Avenue. Okay, that's not bull dust. We know that this did legit happen. Then in 1975, the Lutz family moved into the home. However, they would only stay for 28 days, until fleeing the house, never to return, even leaving their belongings there, claiming that they experienced terrifying supernatural phenomena in the house, including slamming doors, strange odors, the house constantly being cold, swarms of flies invading the home, a ghost boy, green slime, and the appearance of a demonic pig. Paranormal investigators went to the house to try and discover the truth of its supposed supernatural going-ons. George and Kathy Lutz took their story to Jay Anson, who wrote the book The Amityville Horror, which was published in 1977, and as you can see by the book's cover, it boldly states it's a true story, so naturally the book was a hit. Over the years, there have been many claims that the story of Amityville was a hoax. The first author the Lutz family took their story to in an attempt to get the book published stated that most of the book was conceived by himself and the Lutzes and a bottle of wine one night. George Lutz himself supposedly stated that he made some of the events up in the book, but also stated that it wasn't a hoax and that the house was generally haunted. In 2012, a documentary came out titled My Amityville Horror, which follows a now middle-aged Daniel Lutz, who was one of the Lutz children, who stated that there definitely was something supernatural about the house, and that it's deeply affected his whole life. In the documentary, we also learn that he really didn't like George Lutz. I mean a lot. He did not like that guy at all. So, do I think the Amityville Horror really happened? Well, it probably didn't happen. But hey, I wasn't there, so I'll keep an open mind. Number 9. The original author's script was rejected. Producer Samuel Z. Arkoff bought the rights to the Amityville Horror with the intention of bringing the creepy tale to life on the screen, although it was originally going to be the small screen, as the Amityville Horror was going to be a made-for-TV movie for CBS. Incidentally, Jay Anson, who wrote the book, had written a screenplay for the movie which was rejected. I guess having a successful book doesn't equal automatically being a successful scriptwriter. Instead, the script was written by Sander Stern, whom had mainly written for TV, including shows like The Mod Squad and Doc Elliott. It was then decided to make the Amityville Horror a theatrical release, where it was picked up by movie company American International Pictures, which was a division of MGM, and Stuart Rosenberg was hired as director. Just a few years earlier, he also directed The Voyage of the Damned. Number 8. The Case of James Brolin's Mysterious Flying Pants. So with the movie now in production, the search was on to find a George and Kathy Lutz. James Brolin a few years earlier starred in the science fiction hit Westworld and was offered the part of George, but he was very hesitant to take it on as the script wasn't finished at that time. So he bought a copy of the book to read instead of reading an unfinished script. Brolin was so engrossed in the book it had passed 2 in the morning and he was still reading it. And when he got up to one particular tense moment in the book, a pair of pants that Brolin had previously hung up had fallen to the floor, which caused Brolin to leap out of his chair in fear. Brolin concluded that the case of the mysterious falling pants must have been a sign for him to take on the part. I guess flying pants will do that to you. And of course, Margot Kidder was cast as Kathy Lutz, as she had just previously had huge success playing Lois Lane in Superman the movie. Wow, demonic pigs and James Brolin's supernatural pants. This episode truly has it all. Number 7. Filming permission denied. Although the house in the Amityville Horror may look like 112 Ocean Avenue, none of the movie was actually filmed at the real location, as the city of Amityville weren't too enthusiastic about the idea of a horror movie being made about the place and the negative publicity that it may bring with it. So the powers that be actually banned the crew to do any filming in the actual city of Amityville. Instead, the production found a house in New Jersey, which the production slightly altered and modified to look like the Amityville house. So not many people picked up on the fact that the movie wasn't filmed in the real location it was based on. In addition to that, interior filming of the house was shot on sound stages at MGM. But to be fair, the Amityville authorities were right, as ever since the movie, the location has been plagued by enthusiastic fans who want to see the house and maybe even get a glimpse of a ghost or demonic pig. They've even had to change the house's address in order to throw off enthusiastic fans. So is the Amityville house haunted? Well, I don't know if it's haunted by ghosts, but it definitely is haunted by a fan base. Number 6. Not so supernatural shoot. So as mentioned, the late 70s and early 80s was a big time for supernatural thrillers and ghost story horror movies. 2 big examples were The Exorcist and The Omen. Both of those movies' productions were plagued with many unfortunate circumstances, including deaths of people involved in their productions. This led to huge speculation that both these movies were cursed due to their subject matter. This got the production of the Amityville Horror excited, as they felt that they too can get on the curse bandwagon and generate as much conversation among the public as The Exorcist and Omen did. However, the only problem is, absolutely nothing happened on the set. Yep, no freaky stories of curses and weird happenings going on. So apparently, the studio tried to make up stories in order to get public interest. According to Margot Kidder, both she and James Brolin were asked to tell the press about weird stuff happening on the set. Both Kidder and Brolin were skeptical of the book and the supernatural claims that were made, as you can see here in this TV interview Brolin gave with the Lutzes.
I can't say that looking over the story, I believe the book as it's presented totally.
Look at George leaning in there. He doesn't seem happy, does he? Brolin said that when asked about the strange occurrences on the set, he would say things like, "Oh yeah, the other day my lunch fell off the table and landed on my lap." In 2005, Kidder said, quote, "The producers told us that we should say these terrible things happened on the set. It was all bullshit. Nothing happened. But it was funny." To help promote the movie's release, both Kidder and Brolin visited the Amityville house. But, once again, nothing happened there. All Brolin had to say about the experience was the real house felt more condensed than the one they filmed in. In fact, I can remember watching an interview with James Brolin, and he said that he spoke to the Lutz children about the events, and their answers were very on the nose, like maybe they were sort of rehearsed. But once again, I don't know. I wasn't there. Number 5. The music of Amityville Horror. One of the highlights of the Amityville Horror is its creepy and haunting score, which was composed by Lalo Schifrin, who has actually scored many memorable pieces of music, including the Mission Impossible theme, as well as movies like Dirty Harry and Enter the Dragon. His theme for the Amityville Horror uses creepy lullaby music, which has childlike singing and humming, while also sounding very disturbing. His score is actually not too different to the main theme in Poltergeist and Pet Sematary, both of which also used creepy childlike singing and lullabies. There's something of a rumour floating around that the theme for the Amityville Horror was actually a rejected score originally composed for The Exorcist, but Schifrin has denied these claims. The score was so impressive it was nominated for an Academy Award, but lost to a movie called A Little Romance. However, despite my love for this score, there is one small piece of music that bugs me, and that's a part which blatantly uses the Psycho slasher theme. But to be fair, in the 60s and 70s, lots of horror movies would use the slasher score from Psycho, including other horror classics like Carrie and Duel. Number 4. Lord of the Flies. So in the Amityville Horror, there is a memorable scene where the priest turns up to bless the house, where he is attacked by hundreds to thousands of flies, along with a demonic voice. Filming this scene was no easy feat for cinematographer Fred Camp, as he had a serious fear of insects, and considering how many flies were used for that scene, you can imagine that he wasn't exactly having a grand old time filming that scene. So good on him for going through with it. For the shots that involved close-ups of the flies, he would just place the camera where it needed to be and look away and just hope that it all turned out okay. Also, while filming that scene, in order to get the flies to go on Rod Steiger, he actually had honey rubbed on his head. Which kind of makes sense, as I know his character is meant to be sweating, but I always thought that his head looked kind of sticky. And while we're talking about interesting little snippets revolving around the Amityville Horror, let's not forget the real estate agent who shows the Lutzes around the house was also the Save the Clock Tower lady from Back to the Future. I would like to think that the character of the Save the Clock Tower lady is still out there enthusiastically handing out flyers, desperately trying to save the clock tower. But sadly, the actress recently passed away. And would you look at that, Mr. Strickland's in this movie too. Number 3. Struggles for work. At the time of the Amityville Horror's production, James Brolin was truly starting to become a big Hollywood star. And with the huge success that was the Amityville Horror movie, he thought that he had now made it. But sadly, after the movie's release, he actually had trouble finding work, as no one wanted to hire him. It's down to how mean his character became as the movie unfolds, where his portrayal of George Lutz is shown to be an abusive, angry guy, which seemed to put people off Brolin as an actor. He was basically doing the same thing Jack Nicholson did in The Shining, 1 year before The Shining. His career even had a 5-year gap in between starring in High Risk in 1981 to Pee-wee's Big Adventure in 1985. To make matters worse for Brolin, he was nearly cast as James Bond in 1983 for the Bond movie Octopussy, which definitely would have boosted his career. He even went through several screen tests as James Bond, as you can see here. But at the last minute, Roger Moore was brought back into the franchise, so no license to kill for Brolin. But it's not all bad for Brolin, as part of his deal for starring in the Amityville Horror was that he got 10% of the movie's profits, which left him with a tidy $17 million. So, not bad. Number 2. Legacy. In 1982, Amityville 2 The Possession was released, which acted as a soft prequel to the Amityville Horror, and loosely based on the DeFeo family, only they were called the Montelli family. Technically, it's a loosely based prequel, and George Lutz tried to sue the production as they didn't base the movie on a book that he wanted to use about the DeFeos, but instead went for an original script. As a result, the movie had to have a disclaimer that this film had nothing to do with the Lutz family. Then in 1983 there was the Orion-produced Amityville 3D, which despite its title, couldn't promote itself as a sequel to the previous movies due to legal issues, where this time the terrors of the house extend into the third dimension. Spoilers, it's actually pretty boring. But Amityville had now become a franchise, and it was all sequels ahoy from there. As after that we got Amityville 4, The Evil Escapes, The Amityville Curse, Amityville It's About Time, Amityville Dollhouse, the 2005 Amityville Horror Remake, and Amityville The Awakening. And with all these generic sequel titles, I'm surprised we didn't get Amityville Electric Boogaloo. But the Amityville name goes beyond that, as other filmmakers have used the Amityville title to make their own horror movies, probably because no one can copyright the name. All up, there is a whopping 22 Amityville movies. Wow! I would say I'm disappointed, but I think I'm actually more impressed. The never-ending Amityville movie bombardment includes titles such as Amityville Asylum, The Amityville Terror, Amityville No Escape, Amityville Exorcism, Amityville Death House, The Amityville Harvest, The Amityville Poltergeist, as well as Amityville Island. Yep, we've gone from demonic pigs to demonic sharks. Most of these movies were actually direct-to-video releases, and without a doubt, there will be more Amityville movies in the future. Who knows, maybe we'll get a Muppets Amityville. That'll be cool. I got an idea. Amityville Minty. Rawr. Number 1, Amityville takes on the box office. When the Amityville Horror was released in July 1979, its movie poster pretty much set the message across that this house is a terrifying place, with big bold letters stating, "For God's sake, get out." In fact, this tagline is bigger than the actual title of the movie and even stands out more. And this poster just looks like it ripped off The Omen. The Amityville Horror was a massive success, making over $86 million on a $4.7 million budget. I can remember talking to my parents about the Amityville Horror when I was a kid, and they said that they went and saw it, and all their friends went and saw it, because it had that claim of being based on a true story. And for that alone, it was a movie people felt that they had to go and see, so they can see for themselves what happened, and if they felt that it was real or not. They also mentioned that the scene that really stood out and got everyone talking at the time was the bit where the walls started to bleed. So the whole supposedly being based on a true story thing was the biggest thing the Amityville Horror movie had going for it in its marketing. And it worked, as people were going to see this movie in droves. It had the second highest opening of 1979, beaten only by Moonraker. Yep, only 007 was a match for the demonic pig. And it remained the most successful independent movie of all time until 1990's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The movie got very mixed reviews. Some found it to be a solid horror thriller, whereas others found it dull, boring, and ridiculous. But as time has gone by, it's looked back more fondly, and is now considered a horror classic. What appeals to me the most about the Amityville Horror isn't the flies or the bleeding walls, but to me it's a family drama, about a family being torn apart due to the stresses and pressures that come with the family life. The struggles of being a step-parent trying to adjust to a new family, while also dealing with financial hardships. Or at least that's what I take away from it. It's a frightening idea to have someone who is meant to be a loving husband and father figure can turn on their family into a crazed maniac, even going as far as wielding an axe at them. Once again, doing what The Shining did 1 year before The Shining. So go in watching the Amityville Horror not as a big exciting horror movie, but as a movie that takes its time to tell a story. A story about the true horrors of a family being torn apart. Yeah, it's an interesting watch. It's probably not as good as other ghost horror movies of that time, but it's competently made and engaging enough. Sometimes it does drag a little bit and maybe sometimes feels a little bit boring. But you've just got to stick it through and you'll be happy you got through the Amityville Horror by the end of the movie. Anyway, I'm Minty and I just want to take a moment to talk about today's sponsor. You see the okay. See ya.